Thanks, Debs, and hello everybody and welcome. As Deb said, I'm Jill. I will just give you a very brief background to me. I am an RVN. I worked in practice for approximately 15 years, bit of locum work as well. I've worked in veterinary education at the University of Liverpool, and I'm currently the VM Futures project lead for the RCVS. I'll just come over now to the panel, and I think I'll go around everybody as I can see them on screen, just to give a very brief introduction to themselves so we know who we've got on our panel tonight. So Ebony, do you want to go first?
Oh, I was hoping you weren't going to say yeah, hi. Lovely to be here and to be with everyone. I'm Ebony Escalona, an equine vet by trade, but have moved in a squiggly path and been a massive career advocate for all the places a veterinary passport can take you. I set up Vets Stay, Go or Diversify, that celebrates all the diverse places that a veterinary passport can take you, and that's where I currently reside. But I've spent a lot of time working with the VDS training group, as well as charities like Brook and Street Vet and other charities like WWF, and also spent time working in education with a number of universities in the UK. So portfolio career, and here to learn as much from the richness of the room as I have got to offer as well. So I'm really delighted to be here.
Thank you, Ebony, thanks. And Alex, on to you next, or Alexandra, as it says on your...
You can call me Alex, that's absolutely fine, Jill. I'm really pleased to be here. Thank you so much for the invite. So yeah, my name's Alex Taylor. I'm a registered veterinary nurse and have been for 26 years this year. I've been qualified for that long. I'm currently the Senior Vice President of the BVNA, just coming into my final year on BVNA Council. And I'm also the chair of the VM Futures Diversity, Inclusivity and Widening Participation Working Group. And then my sort of day job, if you like, is I feel very privileged to work for the charity International Cat Care as their cat wellbeing and behaviour advisor. And I'm basically cat mad. So that's me in a nutshell.
Thanks, Alex. And Charlotte.
Hi everyone, thank you for the invite. I'm Charlotte Pace. I'm currently the BVNA president, and I currently work in practice. I'm in first opinion practice. I've been nursing for 23 years this year, which feels like it's been a long time, as it sounds.
Thanks, Charlotte. And Steve.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name's Steve Brawley. I'm a practicing vet. Graduated from Glasgow in 1982. Yeah, I can almost hear the gasps of surprise. And I've also got a master's in food science, of all things, from Reading, again in 1990. I've had a quite varying career, from an intern initially, although it wasn't called it in those days. I worked for the PDSA, then joined the army and ran away for 6 years. I've been in industry, independent practices as an employed vet and owning my own practice. And I'm currently the lead vet and joint venture partner at Vets for Pets for Woking, but still very much full-time companion animal, first opinion vet. I've worked on my own with small teams individually, but also commanded a unit of around 200 soldiers out in Hong Kong. As I say, still very much practicing vet. I've got management responsibilities around running a practice and a team of 17 at the moment. So recruitment, retention, development, and growing my colleagues, a huge part of my job. So I'm very pleased to hopefully contribute to this tonight.
Thank you, Steve. I'm sure you will. It's brilliant to see the diversity in this group of panelists. Fantastic. And last but very much not least, Peter.
I'm Peter Graham. I'm also a 1980s Glasgow Vet School graduate. So yeah, I think 34 years coming up. I currently work at University of Nottingham teaching clinical pathology and endocrinology to undergraduates, and one of my roles there is as what we call an embedded module convener for EDI. So that's looking at our undergraduate curriculum's EDI content and what it's got and what it needs. I'm a BSAV board member, which is the reason that I'm here this evening representing BSAVA. And prior to working at University of Nottingham for 12 years, I was managing director of Nationwide Laboratories, a group of diagnostic labs that some of you may be familiar with in the UK.
Definitely familiar with NWL. Okay, thank you, everybody. So the focus for this evening's session, as it's already been mentioned, is on ambition 2 from the workforce report, which is confidence, culture and recognition, which are, you know, all huge topics in themselves, but, you know, we're going to try and bring them all together here this evening. So just to say that the college continues to support and create resources to help members of the professions to feel more confident and supported in their roles. And this is achieved through many avenues of the VN Futures. And of course, VN Futures is something very close to my heart. So we really want all workplaces to embrace the vet-led team approach, to ensure there's adequate delegation, that happens appropriately, and to provide opportunities for leadership as well. So the work that led into the workforce report, which I know most people have read because you completed that as part of your registration, demonstrated that confidence, culture, and that's culture within practice and the profession as a whole, and recognition for all members of the team, are really key in how we feel about working in the profession, whether we want to stay there and the satisfaction that we get from our role. So I'm delighted to be present at this discussion, although I won't be taking part in it. I'm just here to chair it, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from everybody. And as you've heard, we've got a fantastic panel here tonight. So we're also joined by Rick Harris, who is the founder of Customer Faithful, which is a research consultancy. And some of you may have met Rick during our series of insight sessions, which came ahead of the Workforce Summit in 2021. I can't believe that was in 2021. That seems so long ago. So before we dive into the discussion piece, I'll just hand over to Rick, who will talk through how the voice of the professions fed into the Workforce Summit and then the subsequent action plan. So over to you, Rick.
Thank you, Jill. And great to see the panel and so many others as well joining tonight. Let me share my screen and hopefully not share too much dog background noise as well. Yeah, I've just been asked to just spend 5 or 10 minutes, that's all, exploring where this data came from that drove the summit and the action plan as follows. The research we did right at the beginning before the summit was a number of focus groups and a number of one-to-one interviews, and we had such an amazing response. Over 500 people wanted to take part in those groups. I wish we could have done that many, although we would have been there a long time. So we only had time and budget to do a fraction of those, but another 135 completed a survey instead. So we did get a lot of the voice of the profession, which was fantastic. Let me show you sort of how that went. So yes, I am an independent consultant, which I think was quite important to allow people to feel confident to say, you know, how they really felt. It was a UK-wide, it was done remotely, which did enable us to be all over the country. We certainly did some groups in Scotland, I remember that. And we got tons and tons of insight from this, and I will share a little bit of that just in my final slide to give you a flavour of what we heard, and some of it was quite tough stuff. From all of that insight, we took it to the Workforce Summit, which is, as was mentioned, was the back end of 2021, to share those insights, to discuss with others, and to start to look at how might we create change in the profession. We use a technique called design thinking, which is really just to try and be positive and constructive in moving towards things you can test. Which is what a how might we statement is. It's to try and frame it in a positive how might we do something rather than necessarily closed down in a we're sort of helpless and it's negative. A little image there at the bottom of people in action at the summit. And then finally, having run that summit with a lot of stakeholders there, that's really what has been driving that insight has been driving the action plan and its development. And I know that's been going across a wide group of stakeholders and integrating to a lot of what the college has been doing already. So it really is trying to synthesize a lot of information. So that's kind of how it was built. If I just sort of say, well, out of the insight, out of all those focus groups and one-to-ones, this is what went into the summit. These were the 6 themes. And those themes are actually pretty close to the 7 ambitions that you would have read in the action plan. I thought about trying to map them together with lots and lots of arrows, but that would make a very messy slide. But also because actually one of the things that I think the college worked out quite quickly from those themes is that they're not standalone. They all mesh into each other. And the goal was really to kind of blend them together and integrate them to what the college was doing already and other stakeholders to try and get something that hung together as a program rather than just it stays in silos and they are isolated initiatives. And I think that's a real development for the college. From what I've seen, loads of initiatives have been going on for years, but this action plan, I think, really does integrate them together even more. But to come from those suite of 7 ambitions to what you're specifically going to look at tonight is around culture and recognition. And I thought I'd share with you this slide. This is my last slide, you'll be pleased to know. I'm keen for you guys to get started. But I wanted to share this one slide. This is what was given to some of the groups at the summit that came out of specifically what was heard in the focus groups around workplace culture. And particularly the 2 challenges at the top there. One was saying we're losing sight of employee care in the name of hard work. And that's being kind of normalized, and some of the sort of casualties that go alongside of that is becoming just the way we do things. And there was a suggestion that part of that culture was the presenteeism, that you're just there for as long as it takes and seem to be doing that to be in order to demonstrate your worth. And we set the summit up and the teams that were working on these different themes to try and use design thinking and say, well, how might we reset the workplace culture to make it more enjoyable and more sustainable to work, because we're kind of hemorrhaging a lot of people out of the practice or moving towards part-time, so we're losing hours out of the practice. Another group was looking at how we might kind of safeguard the workplace culture to protect against stress and some of the fatigue that was becoming endemic. And I've just included a handful, 4 or 5 quotes of some of the things. These are word for word what people said in the interviews and focus groups to give us a feel of how tough it's become. And I doubt that some of these quotes will come as perhaps too much surprise to you, but when you look at the 3 things you're looking at tonight, confidence and culture and recognition, and how some of these quotes, I'm not going to read them all out, you can hopefully, they're big enough on the screen to see some of the tough things, some of the tough messages that are in there. I love the job, but not the culture, how it interferes with family life, how it's almost saying we're not helping ourselves by burning people out. And I heard the word burnout a lot in the groups. And even as much as people saying we're so short-staffed that I'm concerned about, I'm losing my confidence in safe practice and some of the ratios, and I'm losing my confidence about how stressed we are, that if we make mistakes, that's risky to the point at which I may even leave the profession, and I can't afford to leave the profession, especially the amount of training I've put in. So you can see in some of those comments how just in a few words, some of these issues mesh together and become very serious for any workplace. And a full disclosure, I work a lot in human healthcare with the NHS, and I see a lot of parallels between some of the stress that they are under and what I heard in the vet profession as well. But what they didn't have perhaps is the 3.5 million extra pets coming into the workplace in the way that COVID brought the vet profession. So I'm conscious that some of these were external factors and perhaps one-off factors as well. So I just wanted to share that as an example. I could be here all night and talk through some of that, but I just wanted to set the scene and show how some of these 3 elements of culture and recognition and confidence to come together. So I hope you have an engaging discussion tonight. I wish I could be here for most of it. Unfortunately, I have to get up to London, but I hope that has given you a flavour of what we heard from the inside.
Thank you, Rick. That's brilliant and hopefully really useful to people, like you say. It's really interesting to see those comments from both vets and nurses, and I think it's great that we've got such good representation from across the profession with vets. And what I'm going to do now is each of the panelists is just going to give a sort of 5 to 7 minute piece about their thoughts on this topic. And I thought what I'd do this time is actually go around in reverse order. So Ebony, you're going to have to wait this time. So we'll start off with Peter, if you want to just give us your thoughts on this topic for this evening, please, Peter.
I don't have a huge many, and certainly probably won't take as long as 5 or 7 minutes. But I think it's obvious to everyone that looking after staff is crucial to going to work, wanting to go to work, wanting to stay in those roles, and retention. And clearly, it's a self-fulfilling spiral that if we're not able to look after staff and keep the culture positive, then that will affect turnover of staff, lead to understaffing and greater pressure still within the business unit. I think many places know maybe what they could do or should do. It's not always easy to implement the practice that you want to implement, but it's got to be worth it, hasn't it? For the tremendous positive benefits of a stable, happy workforce. And there are some resources out there. I'm sure we'll hear more about those and the desire to build more resources. Not long ago, I had a look at the BVA, Good Place to Work materials. Lots of useful things in there, many of which you just think must be common sense and must already be happening, but clearly they're not. And some simple things that you hear all over the place about the kind of 80-20 principle of praise and asking everyone, not just the leaders and the managers, but everyone in the workplace, when was the last time they praised somebody for a job well done, or nudged somebody along with a positive comment. Those are things that we can do. They're small things, but every little helps. And I am outside, as you might be able to tell, and I'm a bit cold, so I'm going to stop talking now and try and warm up a little bit and hope to contribute later when I've heard a little more.
Thank you, Peter. I did wonder if you were outside. It looks very dark where you are. Well, thank you very much for your opening comments. I think it's some really good stuff to take away there. So over to you, Charlotte. No, sorry, Steve. Steve is next.
Okay, thank you, Jill. Yeah, so as I said, I'm a practicing vet. I'm not committee members. I'm not an educator or in research, so this is all a bit alien to me. So reading through the brief and what we're going to be looking at tonight, I thought of picking out some of the topics that might arise and where I have seen change and development, and interestingly, where I haven't seen change. Now, I appreciate this is a whole vet-led team discussion. I think through VN Futures, a lot of it will include the vet nurses and development and recognition of them and how we progress them. Now, when I first qualified, there were no vet nurses. The first vet nurse, I think, was the title was 1984, because the term nurse was a protected title for human nurses then. So there were animal nursing auxiliaries, ANAs. And in the human field, an auxiliary nurse is someone who assists doctors, nurses, and health professionals. And in those days, I think nurses, as everyone called them, although we weren't allowed to, the public perceived them as just holding animals and helping the vets and cleaning the kennels and things like that. The vast majority of vets in practice at that time were male, and the vast majority of nurses were females. My year at Glasgow, when we started in 1977, was the first year that there had been more women. There was one more woman than men on the intake, and that was the first year that had happened. On the rare occasions where we did have male nurses present, particularly with a female vet, the owners would assume that the male was the vet and direct everything at them, and would just make those assumptions. I'm using the terms males and females, and I appreciate that, you know, some people, some individuals may identify as something other than that, but in those days we didn't. It was males and females, and times have come a long way from that. Now, despite that, I think it concerns me a bit that in the past 40 years, I'm not convinced that owners and the general public have any more or any different a perception to a great extent. We've tried to educate them. We do Vet Nurse Awareness Week. We put posters up, we train them and try and highlight it, but they will still assume that nurses are there to help us and cuddle their pets and clean them and feed them. We have it on our consent forms for surgical procedures that it may be carried out by a vet nurse. I'm not convinced anyone reads that. And I think if you told an owner whose pet was coming in for a minor surgical procedure that it would be carried out by a nurse, they'd probably be absolutely stunned and horrified by that thought until we do it. The reason I spoke to Jill at this at the celebration was I would have this vision of having a group of nurses as almost nurse practitioners, the way they have in the NHS, and they have autonomy to diagnose minor conditions. There are workflows and charts that say what we can treat it with, because many senior, very experienced nurses know that the 1-year-old male cat coming down with a swelling on his face that's a bit off colour, with a high temperature, has got an abscess, and it needs to be opened and flushed and drained and treated. And they are also perfectly aware of how to take x-rays and how to diagnose and recommend them. So that is how I would see one further stage of nurse development and nurse progressing. But that's a big, big job. The other barrier, or the barrier to that, is shortage of nurses at the moment. You know, if we take nurses to do that, they're coming away from other duties that would be assisting in theatre, monitoring anaesthetics, running nurse clinics and support clinics and things like that. I don't know the answer to that one. I just don't know. I don't know where the nurses are going, why they're leaving. That's not for me to look into. There's a huge amount of work being done in the background to that. The other role I have, I'd say I'm quite passionate about nurses. I have to be careful saying that, don't I? I'm quite passionate about nurse training and development. I opened a practice and went into partnership with my then head nurse, and we went in and she did all the practice management and led the nurse and admin teams and let me focus on the clinical side, which is what I'm best at. Now, we had to close that practice through circumstances beyond our control, but then she came back in and now is running the practice manager role, taking her certificate in practice management, and it's expanding into that. And I think that's an area as well that we should be encouraging nurses to look outside of the clinical side and looking at the team and developing teams and everything else. I could go on all night. Other things I would encourage about confidence and instilling confidence. I think that comes from having a supportive, understanding network where we accept that mistakes happen and we look at them and we analyse why rather than blaming, and how they can be prevented, and encourage people to do those tasks again and not be afraid, not say, well, I can't do that. You encourage them and try and grow confidence. And then, of course, supporting somebody through vile social media dialogue or posts. That was never a thing in my day. I mean, if you wanted to complain, you had to write a letter, arrive 3 days later, and then I wrote a letter back, and by the time we'd exchanged letters for 2 months, everyone had forgotten about it. There was none of the immediate people jumping in.
Yes.
How we handle social media is very difficult. Do you pitch in with a reply and argue with someone, get into a fight over it? Or do you just let them get on and have their rant and almost give them vindication that they are correct. Unfortunately, I tend to have a go back at them if they do me. The
That's
best
the
one,
Glaswegian in you, Steve.
it probably is. Yeah, I'm not going to sit back. The best one was when someone had, made quite a personal attack on me, which didn't bother me too much until somebody else who had nothing to do with it replied, "Yeah, that Steve guy, he struts around like he owns the place." Well, I couldn't help posting back. That's because I do. Made me feel better for a short while, but then it was just annoying that I had ditched him. So supporting them through that, supporting them through criticism, focusing on the good work that they do, and the vast majority of clients that are grateful for a fabulous job that the guys do, rather than this one negative bringing down, providing good constructive feedback tailored to the individual, but also where there's been negligence or somebody being reckless, that has to be addressed as well. So good positive feedback.
Thanks,
that's
Steve.
about it. Sorry, yeah, I'm ranting on.
No, it's fine. It's fine. It's just I want to make sure everybody
absolutely,
does
Jill.
their piece, but that's
I'm sure the other
fantastic.
topics will come up. Thank you.
Really good to hear how supportive you are of veterinary nurses and their progression, and how that role has changed, I think, as well over the years. But as you say, there is still a huge retention issue, as there is in veterinary surgeons as well. So over to you, Charlotte.
Hi. So I've got kind of two kind of perspectives on this, and I thought it was very interesting what Rick was saying, because like the first part of me really comes from my own experience, and my experience is what that those surveys and those task force have shown. I changed career in my late 20s to become a vet nurse, and I was fortunately in a situation where I could take such a drastic pay cut, but it really did affect me when I did, because I was earning minimum wage where I was working in centre of London and enjoying the high life. So you've got people like me who come in a little bit later, who have a different sort of priority set from those who sort of come straight from university into the profession. I've also made quite public in my presidency about my own mental health problems, and I think some of that has come from myself, obviously, and some of it does come from the problems in the veterinary profession. And I think we've had quite a lot of these, or this culture that's been there for quite some time, well, during my nursing career anyway, of that thing of like, well, I had it hard, so must you. I remember as a student nurse, I was expected to do night shifts. I was on my own. It was a busy practice in North London, and I was there on my own as a student nurse, and you'd only be told sort of last minute that you were doing it because the night nurse had called in sick. And and I am a clinical coach today, and and that idea of like, well, my student should suffer because I suffered, that culture is still there, it's still prevalent. And I've touched on it before, but again, money, fair pay, that is a problem with nurses. It really is. It certainly is for me. And one of the things that Rick was touched on was about part-time working. Now, obviously, I'm sort of in my latter years of nursing, because it's a physical job. It's physical, it's mentally tiring, it's emotionally draining, and then the lack of sort of pay and recognition for that when you actually get home from a day's work. And and I've been in teaching environments as well, and through all that time I have also been in bullying cultures. And and I think also it's interesting what Steve was saying as well about this, about nurse team and about empowering nurses, because the answers are there. Some of the answers are there. I think some of them we need to change. I think we need to work on, but some of them are using the vet-led team. I still have this today where my experience, my qualifications are not utilized. They're not good enough. And I think And I think sometimes that is demoralizing, but I think also, you know, it speaks volumes about the profession as well. I think about the industry, sorry, not about nursing, that, you know, we do have a right to be part of that vet-led team. And you know, and there are a lot of progressive vets who do want to, but there are still some who are still holding on to kind of the reins. And again, I guess, I don't know, but I guess that, you know, that is probably part of a problem for them as well, because they have to have this overarching responsibility. And so, you know, I guess, you know, then I've got the second part of kind of comments on this is as BVNA president, you know, and what do I think as BVNA president that we should be shaping the nursing profession to do? You know, and one of my big concerns, and it has been from when I was teaching, to kind of see the churn of nurses, was retention. I think that's a major problem. And part of that, and Alex has very successfully run a Protect the Title campaign, of which our results are just now available. And one of those big important points that came out of that was that, you know, recognition of the job that nurses do. It's something like 98%. I'm sure Alex will correct me if I'm wrong, but something like 98% of nurses came out and said that if they were given proper recognition, then this could help with retention in the profession. Equally as well, you know, things that I'm looking at with the VN Futures role is looking at flexible communication. Also something that the BVA are doing, which is a really good idea, which is the good workplaces, you know, to get that culture, to try and change that culture. And I think that's really great. Unfortunately, it has to come from fairly progressive practices anyway, and that's my issue with it, because, you know, my practice won't do it, for example. So, but I think that there are solutions there to get through, to start changing things. And I guess, you know, like long term, and this will be way past my time, but it is educating. And some of the comments that I've seen, you know, from vet students and also from nurse students, you know, it is that you know, we need to change that. We need to put this in at an early stage into the curriculum, into the syllabus somehow, where it's not expected that just because, you know, your practice manager or your head nurse worked, you know, did night shifts on her own and she just got on with it. You know, there is a part of, yes, it's made me who I am, but it was flipping tough. It really was. And, you know, as Rick said as well, you know, we've got 3.2 million extra animals out there. I've just worked this weekend. It was crazily hectic. The phone doesn't stop. And, you know, bringing up those things of fatigue and stress. I was stressed at a couple of points. I had sort of critical patients in hospital as well. So, you know, I think it is something that's really quite important that we need to look at. And I guess, you know, things like, again, things that we can do, and again, things that we're trying to do with VN Futures and with BVNA are things like the chronic illness. So working with the chronic illness, how can we keep those people? And also, you know, with our, you know, with sort of, I've completely forgot what I was going to say now, working with people with the menopause who forget what they're saying halfway through, that would also be helpful. Very personal, of course, but yeah. But it is that encouragement and working with teams, but also, I guess, somehow, and I don't know how we do this, but some form of client education as well, like managing expectations. I don't know how we do that. But again, some of the conversations that I've had, and Steve said how he's been spoken to before, I've also, you know, ended up in tears when people have been quite rude to me as well. And, you know, and I'm quite an old person that comes along, you know, like the young'uns that are in practice these days, the newer ones, I wonder how they cope with that. I've got a bit more experience behind me, and I know that they, you know, the client doesn't mean it as they say it, but, you know, it still hurts. So I think, you know, overall and in summary, because I think I've just ranted for my time, but, you know, I think some of the solutions are there, and some of the solutions are things that we can do, but are slow, like cultural change. But as nurses, I personally think, and this is me personal and as BVNA president, I guess, that, you know, I just don't think that lip service should be paid to veterinary nurses. we are an integral part. We can help vets. And also, you know, where a nurse is going, and if, you know, Steve said with like nurses doing non-nurse, like, you know, nurse things, well, that's where we have animal care assistants. We promote them and use them, use the whole team to benefit the practice and the profession, which hopefully would keep retention. I think I'll finish there.
Thank you, Charlotte. That's fantastic. Some really insightful comments there. You know, one of the things I'm sure we'll come back to is about client expectations. You know, how much does that affect culture and confidence in practice in our profession? And also this concept of I suffered, so should you. I'm sure we've all heard that from senior colleagues, maybe when we were a bit younger in the profession. Yeah, it was something actually that came up in comments from one of the delegates as well. I just want to briefly go over to the chat because there's a few comments in here that I thought would be good to share, because I'm not sure if you can all see those. But a couple of comments about nurse practitioner status and if paid appropriately. Nurse practitioner status would be good as a title, but this can be implemented right now by any leader in practice as they take the initiative to do so. And then stuff about limitations on and restrictions with diagnosis and treatment. So thanks everybody. So thank you, Charlotte, and over to you, Alex.
Thanks, Jill. I think Charlotte covered a lot in her in her spiel, but I am going to echo some of what she said and also make some other points as well, some things that I've been thinking about since you guys got in touch with me about taking part in this panel discussion. So I was at the RCVS Workforce Summit, and it was a really good event. I really like the idea that there was a lot of blue sky thinking going on there and trying to look for solutions rather than just looking at the problems. I was also in the group that looked at culture as well, so it was quite nice to see that slide as a sort of reminder of what we talked about. And actually, some of the things one of the points that came up time and time again was the proper utilisation of nurses within their role in practice, which I still don't think happens enough or as well as it should do. Having said that, I think in a strange way over COVID that sometimes nurses, because of the lack of staff and the amount of patients that were coming through, think some practices were having to kind of utilise their nurses to their full extent because they had no choice. I'm not sure that was for the right reasons. The other thing that I wanted to flag up, which is something that does bother me, and I see it come up a lot on social media, but also it's something that I've been sort of guilty of doing myself, is that kind of, if you're not if you're not overworking, if you're not working really, really hard to the point where you're nearly at burnout, then you're not very good at your job. You know, you're not working hard enough. Now that comes up on social media. You get all these sort of memes and things that come up. It drives me mad. But it's something that I've been guilty of, certainly in my profession, working in a leadership role where I didn't really have enough, hadn't have enough guidance, enough support, didn't really know what I was doing, and was just filling in gaps basically where I thought they needed to be filled in. And I think that's something that as a profession as a whole, because I think vets and nurses and other team members, we all do it. We think that we're not doing enough if we're not overworking, and I think that's something that should be addressed. Other things that I think are important certainly with culture is interprofessional working. And I just wanted to reflect on my own experiences again in practice. And I worked as a locum for quite a long period of time before. So I have been in clinical practice until recently, and I do still do the odd shift. I worked as a locum for a long period of time, and it was really interesting to see how different practices were run and what the culture was like in different clinics as well. And I can honestly say, hand on heart, the practices where the team members seemed the most happy, where they seemed to feel the most valued, was where there was this really good sort of workplace, this kind of ethos of interprofessional working. I know that there was some comments about psychological safety. Some people had some questions about that. And I think that was that's an important point to raise, because all team members, regardless of where you are, what your role is, should feel valued and should be able to make their points and get their opinions across without fear of being, belittled or laughed at. And the practices that I've worked in where everybody works really well, there has been that element of interprofessional working, and certainly the practice that I locum at, that's the reason I work there essentially, is because I feel valued, and I think that's really, really important. What other things did I have on my list? I also wanted to mention briefly about the Protect the Title campaign, which I know Charlotte did mention, but we've just released our preliminary, can never say that word, results. They came out a few days ago, and even though I think the whole kind of feeling valued thing is, I think it's multifactorial. I don't think there's one reason for it. I think there's lots of different reasons for it. We know from the results of that campaign that not having the price, having that nurses felt if the title was protected, it would help them feel more valued as a profession. Yeah, I don't know if we're able to share the link to those results in the chat, if that's something we could do, or I can probably do that when the next person speaks, if you like, Jill. Yeah, so I just wanted to draw people's attention to that, and hopefully they can have a look and see what they think. So yeah, that's my penny's worth.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, I saw the report yesterday, I think it was. It's really exciting to see those results. And I like your comments about how there's lots of reasons for feeling valued, because there just are, aren't there? There's so many reasons beyond just pay or a thank you, but they help too. Anyway, thank you. Over to you, Ebony.
Well, so much great stuff's already been said. I agree with most of all of that. So as everyone was speaking, I just jotted down seven things that I think, regardless of where you sit in the spectrum of the veterinary workforce, it applies to you. And this is coming from a personal experience. I'm no expert on anything, but I speak to thousands and thousands of vet professionals every year through Vet Stay Go Diversify, often at their point of pain or challenge. And the overriding thing for me is there's far too many square pegs in round holes. And as scientists, we often live in binary thinking. It's either wrong or right, it's black or white, it's left or right. And it's about getting really comfortable with that gray and that nuance that kind of is life. And I think everything we're talking about here is not specific to the vet profession. This is happening in every profession world over, okay? So I think we need to remember that. This is almost a human experience that we're going through societally as well, probably in the Western world. So number one for me is we kind of say, oh, the profession has to sort it out. Well, who makes up the profession, right? All of us, all the individuals. And so I think getting really, really good at prioritizing CPD of self alongside your orthopedics and your endocrinology and your cardiology. If we can understand ourselves, we understand what we need, and then we understand where we fit. So I think that CPD of self is so, so important, that self-management, and to honor that individual within a team. And how do we do that? Well, there's lots of ways of doing that. So number two is thinking about, well, values. Values are really important, yeah? How do we know if we're a square or a square hole, we're a square shape or a circle shape or a diamond or a hexagon? Well, we need to understand what's our internal compass, what really matters to us, right? For instance, I did my internship at Liverpool University and I loved it, one of the best years of my life. And some of my friends did their internship at Rossdale's, and that's an amazing organization. But I know I wouldn't have been a fit there for loads of different reasons. Doesn't make Rossdale's bad, doesn't make Liverpool better, or vice versa. It's about a fit. And we often don't think about that when we're actually trying to find our jobs. So values, and people, we all put our values up. Oh, I want to be kind, we're empathetic, we're innovative, we lead with compassion. Well, that's great. What does that mean? what does that mean to you? Have a conversation with your team. Like, what are the behaviors that makes your place kind? What might be kind for me may be different for Ollie, which may be different for Sophie, which may be different for Jill, right? So I think it's really, really important to think about those values as a team, and think about, okay, well, if you're hitting 3 of my 5 values, I'm probably going to do really well here. But I don't want to just hear the word, I want to hear the behavior. I think that's a really, really good way of feeling confident and feeling like you're in the right culture when you have those values. Number 3 for me, I think as well, is like leadership support and development, because on the whole, people don't leave bad places, they leave bad bosses. And I'll put my hands up, and I've been one of those bosses where people leave, right? So I think it's just really, really important to support the leadership that's going to govern and support the people. And in that leadership support, it's everything from the management skills. All the other speakers have been speaking about being overworked. There's lots of these animals coming in. Well, how's our process? Are we sorting out our diary in the right way? Are we using tech in a way to support ourselves? Are we using triage in the best way that we could be doing? So it's going through all of those things as well. So I think if we can support, if the leader gets supported, it gets filtered down and everywhere else. The 4th thing for me would be about really thinking about co-agreement and trust. I think if you can have a really messy organization. So VSGD is a very messy, chaotic startup organization, but I really hope, in fact, I know there is high trust in my team. So we can make mistakes, we can fail forward, and we can co-agree on the way we're going to do things. And I think maybe as I've been guilty of this, is that as a vet, I want to fix everything. I want to make sure everything's okay, but it's not always about fixing. It's about actually co-agreeing and having that trust to do things as a team, and how we do feedback, right? So the way I want to receive feedback is going to be different from the way you want to receive feedback. You know, they used to, the saying is treat everyone the way you want to be treated. Well, no, it's very different. So do we actually understand all our individuals in our team and in our squad? And I'll put some links in. There's a great resource called Manual of Me, and you can get everyone in your team to create the Manual of Me and share it, to be like, well, this is the way I like to work, this is the way I like to receive feedback, right? And that really, really helps, because we're all individuals working in a team. So how can we co-agree? How can we build trust? And that's going to be different for everyone, and there's absolutely no one size fits all. What works for me is not going to work for you, and vice versa. Recognition and feedback, I think that's already been covered. I don't think I need to kind of talk about that, but how do we give feedback? I used to just give feedback to my team as and when I thought about it. And while in some senses that's great for me, it's not great for them. And I've learned the hard way to actually say, well, would you like to receive, do you want any feedback on that? What would be even better if, rather than just always pulling out the negatives. And I think another thing is variety, I think, is so helpful. We often double down on our weaknesses and we don't double down on our strengths. And I think double downing on our strengths is actually a really important place to be. So many people in VetStego Diversify, I was told, oh, you're encouraging everyone to leave. I'm like, I'm not. I'm encouraging everyone to find their fit. And the people that want to stay in the profession, if they can have a bit of variety, they can have time to flex their social media skills or flex their educational skills or have time to volunteer, they'll stay with you. They'll stay with you for a really long time. And if they go, they're going to come back. So embracing that variety as well, because we're all really amazing multi-potentialites. I think every vet, every nurse, every receptionist, every tech I've met just has 1,000 strings to their bow. And I think that's just really, really important to foster. So yeah, they're the main things. I've gone off on a tangent as well. And just to embrace those kind of 5-minute moments. We don't have to have long one-on-ones, big feedback sessions. There's 5-minute moments of teaching, and there's 5-minute moments of learning from one another. It's kind of making that time, and that comes from making that process, which comes from having that leader, which comes from understanding our values, which comes from understanding ourselves. So yeah, I think, and if you're struggling with all those things, my God, we've got Ollie King here from the Meraki Initiative who can help me with things like that. We've got VDS training and VDS with stuff. We've got SPIVs, we've got BVA, we've got so many places where you don't have to fix it yourself. There are so many organizations that can support us in those development. And if we can prioritize CPD of self and that non-clinical, they're called soft skills, but by God, they're the hardest skills in the world. And it's what keep people, or it makes people go. If we can prioritize those things in our day from 5 minutes to 5 hours, I tell you, we'll move the needle, and we'll make life a lot easier for ourselves, because we're just people working with people, and it doesn't matter what profession you're in.
Oh, thank you, Ebony. Some great points there, and I love that. You know, we're just people working with people, and that's right. We are. It is, like you say, all about the human experience. And somebody's commented about great points. How many of the problems facing our profession are common in other industries? And like you say, it's not even in industries, in professions. It's just everybody. It's just everything. It's
yeah.
You know,
Just quickly, Jill, I was invited to be part of the Squiggly Career Advocates program, and that's where 100 people joined. I don't know if you know the amazing IF people, Helen Tupper and Sarah Ellis. Follow them on LinkedIn, they're incredible, and they embrace the squiggly career, which we all have. Every single panelist here has just said that, and all of these panelists, and I'm just eking out a little bit more of clinical, so I don't fit in it anymore, but all of these panelists are still there at the front line, right? Still there in clinical, but look at what they've done. And what they're trying to encourage is squiggle and stay. And that's understanding the individual and keeping them in. And on these 100 people, I was the only vet, but I was around army people working for Lego, NHS, engineering, all like 100 different sectors. We all had the same problems. So I just think that's so important to know.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And we like the CPD of self as well. Okay, thank you, everybody. It's great just to hear everybody's perspective on it. In my head, it feels like it's going to explode. There's just so many thoughts and ideas there for us to process. I think what we'll do is we'll just pick out a couple of sort of key questions that came in from delegates to the session during their registration. I think I picked out that Steve mentioned about learning culture and about how mistakes made in practice, you know, if we learn from those mistakes, if we reflect on them, learn from them, use them as a positive outcome, you know, how much of a difference that makes to culture within practice. That relationship between culture and standard of care is really important. So just sort of coming around to as well talking about perfectionism and gold standard, and I'll put that in inverted commas, gold standard of care. And if we take the sort of approach where we're trying to deliver that gold standard of care, and I guess that comes around to thinking about client expectation as well, or looking at other perfectionist expectations, this can cause loss of confidence and burnout. And does the panel have any suggestions to deal with this? Sorry, that was a bit of a convoluted question, but hopefully you picked out from that something that you feel you'd like to offer some thoughts on. And whoever wants to go. Alex, you've got your hand up. Thank you.
Yeah, I've not got a lot to say on this, but it was on my list because I really don't like the term gold standard, and I wanted to just get that across. I think it's unachievable, and I think we should be looking at appropriate care for each animal, and working with the pet owner, rather than just trying to go for this gold standard, because what does that even mean? You know, it could depend on which practice you're at. I think it does put vets particularly under pressure to you know, do essentially spend lots of money to try and do all these different tests and do all these different things that may or may not, I won't say they're not going to be beneficial, because they would be, but they may not be what the owner wants or what the owner can afford. So I just wanted to flag that I just really don't like that term, and I think it's something that we should be looking to move away from, really.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Alex. believe it or not, I had even more to say at the start before I got carried away. And we just do not use the term gold standard in our practice. There is no such thing. You know, who determines what the gold standard treatment for a particular case is? It has to be determined by the clients, their expectations, their personal views and desires for the pet, financial constraints or otherwise, skill sets within the team, equipment levels, everything else. You know, if you decide that a gold standard for every abdominal mass must be a CT scan and ultrasound guided biopsies and things, then no one is, so very, very few people are going to get gold standard treatment. Do we then say, oh, well, you can't afford that, let's go for the bronze package, or we'll do it even more special for you and we'll get the platinum package? So no, it's not a term that we do. I think we should strive to do the best care for each individual within those parameters.
Thank you, Steve. Has anybody else got any comments on that at all? Ebony?
Yeah, I just think we need to take the gold standard away and just think about pragmatic care, because it's all about being pragmatic, whether you've got £1 million or you've got £2. And I think we can learn a lot from our charitable partners, from people like the PDSA and the RSPCA. I know that I definitely feel like I became a better vet after I'd spent 5 years working for the Brook charity. So I think it's just so important to think about, what does pragmatic mean to all of us? And I think it's also okay, though, I don't ever use the word gold standard, but it's okay for different organizations and different practices to offer different kind of levels of care, right? It's not standards. Our standards are all great, but it's levels of different care, right? And the beautiful thing is that we've got each other to lean on. So we don't all have to be playing at the same level. We're all in the game. We're all playing the game really, really well. And the whole point of this profession is not winning or losing. It's just staying in the game, and it's having our piece on the playing field. So I just think pragmatic care, we need to define what that means for each of us.
Thank you, Ebony. And my suggestion was contextualized care, because I think it comes down to money and all the other factors that go into making decisions about treatment, doesn't it? And I see Anne Garrett there has actually shared a link from our CVS Knowledge. Peter, I can see you've got your hand up.
Oh, Peter, you're on mute. You're on mute.
Oh, thank you. Sorry about that. Yeah, just thinking about the University of Nottingham student experience, I think we do very much emphasise some of the things that we've talked about tonight, about being part of a vet-led team and about pragmatic first opinion care. I think is very much on the agenda in our undergraduate curriculum, and I kind of assume the way that universities are following one another quite closely these days that must be coming to the fore. And then sort of have to admit that I missed out on gold standard. I don't know where that, I was not listening to the profession for a while and came back and it was there, and I don't know where it came from, and I don't know what drove it. And I don't know if it was driven from referralists telling people what they should be doing and criticizing them if they didn't do it, or did it come from the kind of retailization, upselling of what we should be offering people to make sure that we can maximize what happens in a clinic? I missed out on it. And talking about those different levels of contextualized care, when I was a postgraduate looking at diabetic dogs and going around the country delivering CPD, I remember I used to deliver a kind of a 4-level program for different ways that you could treat diabetics depending on what your resources are. And now thinking back about it, I probably used the words bronze, silver and gold, which is totally the wrong thing to have done. But yeah, contextual pragmatic care, at least our university is definitely trying to get our students to see that aspect, whilst at the same time trying not to close their eyes completely to the possibility that there are more advanced options sometimes available in some circumstances, but certainly not giving them the expectation that that's what should happen to all their patients.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks. I'll just highlight there that Mark has commented we need to be careful entering into a debate about gold standard care. we just define ourselves as medical professionals. We're fundamentally gold standard focused and not necessarily answer to the retention problem. I suppose what we're trying to look at is if we're aiming for that goal of gold standard and perfectionism, which we all seem to have in the profession, you know, how is that helping us in terms of culture and, you know, feeling confident in our role. So coming on to confidence, we have a question here about that, and confidence comes with experience, but can we lay foundations and build understanding of this during training, whether that's vet school or VN training? And is there anything that can speed up or enhance this process in the workplace? How can we enhance, speed up building confidence? Has anyone got any thoughts on that? Charlotte, thank you.
I think one of the things that we can do to increase confidence is to get sort of more time with students. I know there's discussion about EMS, and I've not really been part of that, but you know, in getting vet students and vet nurses much more integrated into practice sooner, so you can see the you know the trials and tribulations pretty much of everyday practice, so that then it doesn't come as a shock. But also, you know, when you're there on your placement, you're much happier maybe to pick up the phone and answer, because you know you've been playing around with the computer system whilst you were looking at you know, at histories, and you're able to, you know, you've heard enough of what people say. You know, if you integrated that from the first year and embed it throughout, I think that might help with increasing confidence. That's the only really practical thing I can see, because yeah, as Malcolm said, I think, you know, pragmatism and all of that confidence, it all comes with experience, and that is the difficult thing. The other thing, when I was at a conference at the end of January that on flexible working, they were talking about, like, this was a woman in the NHS. She was talking about how to keep hold of older nurses, because they obviously they may not be able to do it physically, like, you know, I'm struggling now, but keeping them there, because then they are the experience and the confidence. They can be answering the phones, and the younger people can be, you know, younger, fitter, healthier people can be picking up animals and restraining and doing whatever that, you know, physically I find challenging these days. But keeping those people, if you can, into that culture, to be able to use their experience, which will then, you know, almost like a mentor status, I suppose.
Yes, I really resonate with that, Charlotte. I think that keeping that that historical and bank of experience in the mix through that flexible way of working is incredible. And one thing I just wanted to add as well about confidence is that's a massive confidence in what, right? Like, we need to get so specific and so curious about what it is. So I hear people say, and this is me also, right? God, I don't feel confident in surgery. Oh God, it makes me feel really sick. Oh my God, I can't do it, right? Okay, by the way, I'm a horse vet, so I'm allowed to say things that probably aren't true in the animal world. But let's say you're going to go for a bitch spay, of which, by the way, I have never done one on my own, but I know I could do it if I wanted to, right? So it's not the bitch spay in its entirety that you feel underconfident in. It's something in that. You can probably break it down in 7 ways. You can probably do the first part really, really well. What part of it are you underconfident in, right? What part of client communication or conflict are you underconfident in? Our leaders and mentors need to get so curious. We need to build better coaching acumen for them to get so curious to the point where we get to the nub, because what they're actually underconfident in is that, and what they feel is this, right? Our life in imagination is so much worse than reality, right? So I think we have to get so good at getting down to, like, what is the specific piece that you are underconfident in, because we can build on that. We can definitely build on that part.
I think it sounds a lot of self-awareness on both sides. It's not just the leader personal development, which is that mindful leadership piece, which is everything that we're talking about now has been nothing new. It's been brewing for the last 10 years. It's now just got to beyond all sense of perspective, that I agree. It's mirrored in lots of other professions as well, but it's now getting to the point of hand holding and needing to come down from the top down, that we need guidance in how to do this, how to do that. Everyone works differently, and it's having a kind of, you have to try something for what works in your workplace, and recognizing the challenges that you have, and the awareness of those rapport with your team, that humility, and that to see if actually you do need to upskill, having that with the trust and understanding through the mentorship and understanding the needs of your people. And as Ebony says, it may just finding out what is that little bit that you actually need, so you're specific and you identify the barriers. And that looks like getting clear on what exactly support someone actually needs as an individual, so they get more aware, and putting a language and the specificity to that emotion or to that context, rather than blowing it all out of proportion, and it just seems quite vague. And then when it's vague, you don't know what needs to change for that one person, and so they then might end up drifting and perceived as the wrong workplace for them. But actually it may have just been, well, actually I never had that one-to-one mentor, and it doesn't have to be for a new graduate, it could be for anyone, that mentorship piece within the workplace. What does that onboarding piece look for anyone joining? So there's the vet GDP, which is a positive nudge, but there's vet GDP, it should be for everyone joining a workplace.
Yeah. Thanks, Ollie. Thanks. Steve, I think you wanted to make a comment. I saw you with your hand up a short while ago.
Just around the confidence thing. There was a question earlier on the documents about, can you teach confidence? I thought quite closely about that, and I don't think you can. I don't think it's something you can. I think you can certainly help develop it, or you can equally shatter it. But I think kind words, supportive words, can do massive good to develop someone's confidence. It creates it, and I think also when you do that, it almost creates a culture of them then encouraging others, you know, sort of this monkey see, monkey do type of thing. You foster that culture of support and kind words rather than criticism. As I said earlier, when things go wrong, analyze them, discuss them, put measures into place to help them that way. I mean, confidence just doesn't come, it doesn't come out of nowhere. It's a result of doing something, you know, sort of hours, days, weeks, even years of constant work and application and dedication to it. And that wasn't my quote, that was the Dallas Cowboys quarterback. So very, very famous sportsman. But you can't just expect it to be there, you've got to develop it yourself. Yeah. But you need the support and encouragement for that.
Yeah, absolutely, Steve. We've only got 5 minutes left, I think. I just wanted to throw one sort of final question in. So if you could all just give a very brief thought on this one. And it might seem dull at first, but actually it's something that could really change the face of our profession. And that will be, how would you envisage legislative reform having a positive impact on culture and confidence? If you have any thoughts on that, please, very briefly. Obviously, go on.
Okay, legislative reform. Let's go to the Schedule 3 nursing, which I'm surprised hadn't come up yet, and is a great bone of contention for nurses. I think clearer direction from the college as to what nurses can and cannot do. I know they will state what the laws are, if it's a law or a regulation, I don't know, but it's still very grey, you know, what is entering a body cavity. In my opinion, entering a tooth socket where the tooth is so loose and falling out that is actually an illegal act is nonsense. Yeah, certainly we would not expect nurses to be doing laparotomies and splenectomies and things like that. Although with an apprenticeship and a couple of years of training, yes, they could. Anybody could. But you know, clearly defining that and enhancing the rules. How many nurses do we hear saying, well, we used to be able to do cat castrates, dog castrates, dental extractions. There were nurse courses for it. We took a huge backward step just because someone looked at the legal definition of a cavity. And my understanding is that's what set everything back.
Yeah.
So looking at that and looking at the whole, as I say, what nurses can do, diagnosis, treat autonomously within strictly guided parameters, I think that's where it could help.
Thanks, Steve.
Retention and confidence.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody else, any comments on maybe some other parts of that legislative reform? Alex?
Yeah, can you just repeat what your initial question was for me? Was it around confidence or was it around feeling valued? Because I've forgotten already. And then I'll answer
it was how would you envisage legislative reform having a positive impact on culture and confidence?
Culture, right. Yeah, that's such a big question, isn't it? I mean, I think my main point with it is we all know that the legislative reform is well overdue, and that lots of parts of that could affect, certainly with my veterinary nurse hat on it, can affect veterinary nurses, and feeling valued and enhancing the role of the veterinary nurse as well. So I do think it will make a difference, because it will, I don't know, enable us to expand our role more, which is what we need. There's plenty of nurses out there that have the skills and they have the talent to do more. We're just not being given that opportunity, and I think that legislation is holding us back.
Yeah.
So I think that is really important, and obviously protection of the title, which is absolutely linked with feeling valued as well. So yeah.
Thanks, Alex. Anybody else got any final comments on that? Charlotte?
I just reiterate really what Alex is saying, that legislative reform, you know, we know that the Vet Surgeons Act is so overdue an overhaul, and yes, absolutely, protecting the title and allowing us to do the skills that some people have and want to use, absolutely, that would create a culture where we do have more of a vet-led team. And also it would increase confidence, hopefully keep retention as well, because nurses are doing what they want to do.
Thank you. Thanks. We're kind of running out of time, but Steve, if you're quick.
Yeah, okay. Be quick. Yeah, one thing I would say with legislative reform is that developing the nurses, so many of these courses and further education and qualifications are only available to degree nurses because of the level of education they've attained. And so being, you exclude nurses from before there were degrees. And that's been a big bone of contention as well.
Okay, thanks, Steve.
Oh, blank faces.
Thanks, Steve.
Okay,
Okay, so I'm going to hand back over to Debs now just to close the session, if that's okay, Debs. I can't see you. Where are you? There you are.
I'm here.
Okay, thank you. I think you're going to highlight some resources that will be available to attendants, aren't you, Debs?
Yes, so thank you everyone for joining us tonight. It's been really interactive, all your comments in the chat box. We will be releasing the recording shortly via email, and it will also be on the website. Any resources that have come to light tonight, I will get from the panel, and I'll make sure you get a copy of the links and stuff. So thanks again for joining. There are other sessions that you can join. They're all on Eventbrite, and I'll put that also in the follow-up email. So thank you again. Have a lovely evening.
Thank you, Debs, and thank you, everyone. Thank you to all the panelists this evening as well.